So talking about the keys of monetization, and particularly in this area where we've seen so many changes happening, so many options happening, so many alternative strategies, understanding what drives the monetization is going to be really key. Okay. And on that note, I think...
Here we go.
Uffe, shall I leave that to you?
Yes.
Go for it.
And we all good to go?
Go for it.
Thank you. We have a timer right there. Thank you all for attending this panel today. I hope you all had a good day and a good evening yesterday as well. Together with me today, I have Allison and Stan and Falko and Nir that has been so kind to join us here today. My name is Uffe Flarup. I'm from Multiscription. We are making a subscription service called Unleashed, which you can hear more about in our booth at the meeting room. With that, I will hand over to you to each introduce yourselves. Would you like to start, Allison?
Sure. I'm Allison Bilas. I'm the COO at GameAnalytics. We're an analytics and data platform, of course, for games, so happy to be here.
Yeah, my name is Minasov. I'm VP of Product at AppMagic, an analytical service for analyzing mobile markets and gaining actionable insights. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm Falko. I'm the Director of Business Development at Phoenix Games. We're a group of game studios, five mobile and PC studios, free to play, and yeah, happy to be here.
Hey, I'm Nir Regev from Supersonic from Unity, Director of Publishing, which is basically managing all the new games of the company. It's a pleasure to be here.
And what game are you playing at the moment? I mean, not this moment, but in the evening, what are you playing?
I'm playing a game called 20, mobile game where you're matching numbers. It's definitely my style, trying to match them as quickly as possible to get to 20. It's a fun one.
I recently got back to League of Legends Wild Rift. So I delete it from time to time, I return from time to time. But I hopefully will delete it a week later, but right now I'm really into it.
Yeah, for me on PC, it's Starfield, getting into that. On the indie side, Blasphemous 2, really like that game. And mobile games, of course, a lot of games for work, but one that I'm particularly addicted to as kind of my daily routine is Merge Mayor by Starberry. Love that game.
Yeah, for me, it's Clash Royale. Quite easy for the past, 4 years.
Yeah, I also recently started on Starfield. I'm not done yet. I think I'm still in the tutorial area. So,
yeah, but they say it takes 8 hours to be good, right? And definitely it grew on me, so
yeah,
stick to it.
And for those of you that were here earlier, I'm also a Pokemon Go fan, so I'm still playing that with my kids. All right, let's, on a more serious note, let's get started. Let's look a bit into the future at the panel here today. Do you see one type of monetization dominate in the future, or should developers embrace more options and incorporate more options into the game? So maybe you should start with you, Nir.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but as we saw in the past, there is no one type of monetization because there is no one type of game or users. So I think that what we expect to see is that game developers will adapt new monetization strategies and new type of audiences for their games in order to squeeze more revenues and to reach new places for their games. I think a great example is from where we are coming from, which is the hyper-casual market, which is slightly and slowly shifting into more IAP-based, rewarded video-based monetization, which is still part of the simple core gameplay which represent the hyper-casual market, but there is demand for deeper gameplays, deeper progression, and it's something that we're seeing more and more taking place in the hyper-casual industry, which is now called hybrid casual. So I think this is a great example of how game developers and companies will utilize more type of audiences and will squeeze more type of revenues and monetization strategies from their games. There are a lot of things that you need to do in order to prepare for those type of monetization strategies, and in terms of gameplay, in terms of economy progression, which is changing significantly the development cycle, the games, the type of experience and knowledge you need to have. But I think it's a good example of where we'll see the companies, game developers taking their monetization strategies in 2024.
Nice, nice. I couldn't agree more. So there is a trend right now, go into hybrid monetization, trying to balance in-app purchases and in-app advertising in one game. And of course, the sweet spot is 50-50, though at the end of the day, the main goal is to monetize your player base the best way possible. And we were having a big talk with the head of publishing from Voodoo, and the guys, they spent 2 years trying to switch their already existing games and new published games as well to hybrid model. So this definitely what is going on right now, and I'm pretty sure it will be going in the upcoming year as well. I also think that, especially of the whole market decrease, of the post-IDFA era, and the news like Unity that hit just yesterday, I'm pretty sure you all have heard about it. So the new types of monetization will rise as well. For example, we don't talk about subscription much enough, I think, and this type of monetization is used widely in non-gaming apps, say health and fitness, say, I don't know, meditation, mental health, finance, almost in every niche, there is adoption of the subscription model. In the games, not so popular right now, and I think there is a big place for embracing this type, be it different periods like 1 week, 1 month, 1 year monetization, or different things included in the monetization itself. Like, for example, for idle tycoons, you can increase the number of resources obtained by your customers, or some gacha elements they can help to progress along the game, or maybe help with the UI UX and just remove all the ads. Pretty popular option right now. So I'm pretty sure we will be seeing like new ways of monetization in the upcoming year as well, compared to hybrid.
The way I see it is kind of a pendulum, particularly for mobile, that we started with in-app purchases first. That was before ads were a thing and were possible, and then ads have become dominant, maybe. I know there's always been in-app, depending on what your game style was, but that was a big thing, of course, with hyper-casual, and now the pendulum is just swinging back to in-app purchases. So I see IAP as kind of the core, and then these other, even ads being additive or something to add on top with a game when you're considering to develop it now, at least in this environment.
Yeah, I think balancing all these different things is going to be a big topic next year, right? Because we have so many different kinds of players that react differently to different kind of purchase options or ads. Some will only interact with rewarded ads. Some just don't care by any loot box you have. Some wanted something that specifically catered to them. So figuring out what is the right thing to show to a player and how to interact with them, and then balancing that in like a mid-core game where you have a complex like dynamic behind it where everything affects everything else, providing the value to the paying player while still offering the free players enough, or the ones that only interact with ads, keeping that fair and interesting, and that value kind of like on the level that works for you and the players. I think that balancing is going to be interesting to see next year. While if you mix in things like subscriptions, game-specific subscriptions, or subscriptions that cover multiple games, purchases, rewarded ads, different, like all of those, like interact with each other.
Yes, and you brought up the topic of in-app purchases as well. Do you foresee that alternative stores also will arise, partly to combat a little bit the 30% cut that Apple and Google takes, and also gives easier means of distribution of games?
Yeah, so there's a lot of that happening right now, right? There's multiple parties that offer this kind of service now. I think it makes total sense in the PC free-to-play era of like 2007 to 2012. That's how you had your customers, right? And you controlled their journey, and you controlled what to show them and how, and make interesting offers based on their playstyle. And I feel mobile took that away from a lot of people, and it's interesting to see it reemerge now that the legal kind of environment for that is changing. Apple is still fighting that in core to some extent. They give you big warnings when you leave their ecosystem. So let's see if you're just a little bit interested if your regular player will go past that message of you're leaving the safe ecosystem now, don't get scammed or something. It's scary for if you have this wide kind of audience. So and then what implication does that have down the road? Will Apple start burying all the games in the like visibility in the stores that use those systems, right? Like, where's the sweet spot? How far can you go? The ideal case is just ads on top of what is already there, where everybody's happy, right? Apple doesn't lose any money because people still use their in-game systems, but for your more engaged players, and those are probably the ones that go to these stores first, you have additional offers that are more catered for almost like a VIP experience.
Yes.
But in general, I'd say that right now the legal side of the question is still a bit unclear. So only really big brands, really big companies with a big user base can use web stores and can be sure that they will have enough revenue, even losing part of the conversion due to the going from the app to this web store and back to the app. So what is interesting is that it's not only about 30% cut, which is sweet enough, it's also about the regulations that are there in the App Store. So say you've got whale players who are ready to like cash in $100,000 at once. They're ready to make this payment. You won't be able to make an offer like that in App Store right now, but using a web store of your own, easy. Another great example is using different games and cross-promotion of their games in one ecosystem, let us call it so. So when you've got different resources and you can buy bundles of these different resources in different games, it really helps because in the end of the day, either your players will be happier because they can obtain more value at the same price, and it's not possible right now in the source, or you can cross-promote. So if they play only one game, you can then give resources and give some value in other your games as well, and there is a chance they will download the game, try it out, and, well, lucky enough, stay there.
Yes. Another thing that was brought up earlier here as well, of course, the ads. You briefly mentioned the IDFA changes. Mm-hmm. Where did that land? Is it how much did it break the monetization landscape for ad-based games, and how is that looking moving forward?
Yeah, my perception of this changes every day, I think. And before coming to this conference, actually, I was thinking mostly the IDFA has hurt the bigger hyper-casual publishers. And so they are clearly being they're very open about their strategy change. Now they're pushing more in-app purchases. And I was excited at that point that it opened up for maybe smaller companies, studios wanting to push their own hyper-casual games. Of course, then we had the Unity news. Maybe that's not going to be the case. The other thing that I was talking with someone at the conference here was that, you know, this trend was actually, if you were thinking if IDFA didn't even happen, hyper-casual players were becoming more demanding of games that had more retention features in them, better gameplay, better graphics, all of that. And so they were seeing that they weren't able to buy really inexpensive users and make enough money off of them. The games really needed to catch up, in part because of what they were advertising. Like, they were making these very rich advertising experiences, and then you'd be dumped into a hyper-casual game that wasn't reflective of that. So I think the player behavior behind all of it is something that just dawned on me with this conference of like, oh wow, actually players might have been moving up that way anyway. So IDFA did happen. It did have an impact, but the player behavior shifts as well, as part of that continuum maybe, or pendulum I was talking about. So, yes. Yeah.
It is true, the audience is maturing, going from hyper-casual, the easiest games, to mid-core, casual and then mid-core. Yeah. So it's like a natural process. But I totally agree with you, it's a pendulum, and we can see it with the IDFA as well. Let's not forget that Google didn't yet announce their IDFA, and it's coming, I think, early next year right now, and there is...
Sandbox, yeah.
Yeah, there is a chance we will see a drop once again. So we've seen a drop already. The industry tried to cope with it. There are different ways, ways of increasing once again the number of downloads, the number of users acquired. But I don't think that's the end. And the good question is, what should we do next based on it? So post-IDFA, how to learn it, how to survive in it. And I think the answer in its core, in its shell, is creating really good games with a catchy core, and that's the hybrid casual we've talked about is really about. So trying to retain the players as long as you can, trying to entertain them as long as you can. If you tune this, if you master this approach, then even if the CPI grows, you still will be having a good player base, a good retention, and then in the end of the day, you will be profitable. So I think all these changes will lead us to concentrating not on the marketing side more, but rather creating really catchy, really good games that help us to retain our player base.
At the same time, I'm fascinated by this arms race of technology, of how can we identify what kind of players we have, right? Like, it went from you know basically everything about a person coming into your game to now like, okay, let's look at the RAM the phone has, because there's like a step where you can assume they have a higher end phone, so we can offer them a higher end kind of package, like starter package or something like that. And this kind of digital fingerprinting based on screen resolutions and so many like little factors that you can still get, and then the platform's slightly pushing a little bit against this kind of fingerprinting. It's interesting for me to see like how that will come out in the end, because that continues into the game as well, right? You want to learn more and more about the players. That's something that we try to do a lot, is like learn about the player based on their behavior once they are in your game. How do they interact with it? What do they like? How's their play style? And maybe then start making offers based on that. So the players come with less information than they ever did, so you have to cater a bit more to them, like with the information you gain afterwards.
But at the same side, let's not forget that the technology is growing stronger as well. So machine learning and big data is getting more approachable even by gaming companies themselves, not just like Facebook or Apple, really big corporations. And that means that we can gain more information even from less data from our clients. So this is a trend as well. So it's like a wave coming up, and at the same time, wave coming down with the CPI growing because of all the IDFA changes. It's really interesting what will be the end result, the breakpoint.
So to sum up about the IDFA changes, if you were to recommend someone to go with ads, also something else, would you ever recommend someone to go with only ads, or would they have to do something else on top to live in this post-IDFA market?
I think it always has been a good idea to go with more than just ads, right? Yeah. And hyper-casual was just so cheap that it just worked for a while, but pretty early on you saw those games get more complex, even before, right? It went from like a just basic level-based system to something that is like a high-score system to like more levels. Then you could start collecting things in-game, because things like long-term user engagement have always been important, and different monetization models are always a big part of it. And you want to have something, why not offer something to the players that are already interested in spending more time in your game? So I don't think it's only an IDFA thing that we should offer the players more options than just interacting with ads.
Yes.
Yeah, I just like have to add, like I think there will be always like demand for like hyper-casual games, simple hyper-casual games that will be monetized mainly with ads. Like although CPIs and went up and IDFA made everything like more challenging, we still see a huge demand for like simple, classic hyper-casual games. We still see it's working. Yeah, it created like more opportunities, and for some of the games that experience like increase in the CPI, which only interstitials, only ads couldn't compensate with those changes. You do need to change your strategy and your games and your features inside the games and create long-term experience and retention in order to create the motivation to watch rewarded videos, ads, and to watch and to interact with in-app purchases. In general, I would say like it's a kind of a nature evolvement in the kind of the games that we're seeing from both hyper-casual and hybrid-casual. But yeah, I think it's also like kind of good. Like you have a stronger competition. You need to provide better products, better data from your users. So it's also like there is a good side of it.
Do you think those, not a question we talked about before, but do you think those really simple games, because I really enjoy those. 20, for example, is a really simple one. I worked on Bejeweled Blitz back in the day. We were talking about, that's pretty much a hyper-casual game. They just didn't have ads back then. Do you think that a game like that could survive now on a premium purchase, like a $3 purchase or something like that?
I think it's a good question. Only time will tell. First of all, like we are quite a long time after like IDFA, and we still see like everything is like okay, it didn't crash. Like yeah, it's harder. I think that it's something that everyone are A/B testing and trying to understand exactly what would be the best way to implement those type of features. In some of them, it probably will work, and some of them not. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't.
Yeah, it does always depend on the gameplay.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
probably.
Would a user spend X for that, and in what way do they want to put their value forward? In watching ads and putting down money? So.
Definitely. I think that also something which we're all seeing as a trend is that because game developers starting to create like a deeper experience and they have more things to offer, it kind of creates more opportunities for different type of users. So when you're acquiring different type of users for your game, it enhances the IAP and those type of opportunities in the games, which back in the days when you acquired like 10 cent, 20 cent users with the classic hyper-casual games, it wasn't like the goal. It wasn't like the target audience that you want to have. But today it's like more diverse, I would say. Mm.
So now that the cost of users also have gone up, does that change your view on the retention numbers that games needs to be able to show in order for you to want to work with them, like day 1 and 7 and 30 retention? Are those numbers going up now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's something we've learned over the past 2 or 3 years of that we've seen the market is changing, and the type of games and genres is changing in the hyper-casual, hybrid-casual market. Is the most important thing is to understand that benchmark, it's not a rule of thumb. Like you can't say we need, I don't know, 40% day 1 retention, 15% day 7, and if you have it, everything will be good and you'll have a hit game. I think this is something that everyone kind of learned over the past years. You need to understand exactly what type of genre you are working at, to look at the competitors, to try to find more data points from experience from other games that your colleagues in the industry or your own company used to work on, and kind of define exactly the right benchmarks, not only for retention, but for marketability, for CPI, and not only for Facebook, but also for other media sources. Today, like it's just not enough. If 2 years ago you could test your games and define benchmarks only for Facebook users, today you need also Google, and you need also Iron Source users and Unity users and AppLab and basically everything in order to understand the potential of your game. So I would say that defining specific KPI goals for each type of game, for each type of aspect inside a game, marketability, monetization, engagement, this is what will bring the efficiency and will make you chase the right numbers and not like chasing impossible numbers that you will never get. So in my perspective, this is like the most important thing when you're approaching a new game, a new genre, and you're doing the research. This is like one of the most important things to define and understand the right benchmarks that you need to achieve in order to have a good potential game.
On that topic, from a GameAnalytics perspective, we looked at hyper-casual games versus casual games and benchmarks for retention, and pretty much found that both of those genres have the same retention curves. Like there's nothing really different between the two, which was surprising. And I started saying it at conferences, and people thought I was crazy. So I went back and checked numbers multiple times, but really those curves are the same. I think what's different about them, what we also see in the numbers, is that it's session length. That for casual games, they play longer. So there's more in the game to get your players to play for 10 minutes instead of 2 minutes, which gives you so many more opportunities to inspire them to spend some money, and also show them ads as well. So yeah, it's not retention for me. I like what you're saying. It's a mathematical equation, all of these things coming together to get LTV versus your CPI, and there's many moving parts.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, as I said, there's many moving parts here, and it's very complicated. And this is what you're doing as a full-time job, as a smaller developer. If you're going to make something like this is an overwhelming piece of work. How important is it for a smaller studio to think all these things with monetization options and player acquisitions into account early? Can they postpone it till like they meet a publisher, or do they need to figure that into account very early on in the development cycle of their games?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, which personally, like, I'm having a lot of meetings with game developers that used to work with us, and some of them moved to self-publishing, which personally it's amazing to see. I think that for developers, the small developers, indie developers that just want to create a good game, it's not like something that they had to take in mind. But if you want to create a good business out of your game, you must like take it into account. You must plan. You must investigate. You must do the right research to understand the type of users that you are aiming for, and then to understand what would be the best monetization strategy, experience inside the game, in order to and make sure that the combination between them will be the right fit for the target audience that you're planning to create a game for. So in my eyes, I think this is something that became harder, obviously, for small developers. It's more expensive. It's not impossible, but it is harder today. And obviously, this is exactly what Supersonic and other like publishers are here for and to do. And I must say that again, it's something that for us, for Supersonic, it's also super important to educate and to teach game developers everything around the monetization, knowledge, user acquisition, and everything, both because it creates a great synergy, even if you are collaborating between a publisher to developer. In the end of the day, when both sides understand each other, like strengths, weaknesses, and they know exactly where to come up with the right solutions, so the synergy is much like better. And again, I think it's also something that game developers can learn from the publishers, and then whoever wants, like not all the game developers want to deal with user acquisition, with scaling games. For I would say for a lot of them, it's not something they love to do, and they really want to focus on develop and create great games. But for the ones that do want one day to become a self-publishing company, it is super important to make sure you're getting the right education, and the publisher can teach you what to do and what is important and what is less important, in order to reach the point that you can actually do it yourself.
I think that's a very valid point, that you have to decide whether you are making a game of your own as a passion, and that's totally fine. You just have to know what amount of resources are you willing to put into it, or you're making a game and a business. And even here, for example, at AppMagic, we've seen that a lot of people, a lot of games were made on the hype wave. So there is a big game coming out, smashing hit, and then there is sometimes hundreds of games in the same style, in the same game design, trying to copy their success. And the majority of these developers, they try to make a good game. They really believe in it. But they don't understand what monetization principles, what game design principles lie beneath this game. And in the end of the day, the majority of the games are not very successful. So, for example, Archero, you probably all heard about it, maybe played it. So after the release of the game, the upcoming year, there was like 60 clones, direct clones of Archero. They've earned less than 5% of Archero revenue. Less than 5%. It's a big number. Or saying Coin Master. A lot of companies trying to copy their success, Monopoly Go, big thing. But a lot of people think that Coin Master began not as an interesting game design project, not as an idea, let's make a gambling game with a steal and twist. Coin Master began as a bunch of economy PhDs sitting in one room and saying, okay, let's make a really good monetization loop. And then we can come up with game design, then we can come up with the UX UI, user acquisition. And that's the main reason this game is so profitable. So when even thinking about the business, you really have to know how you want to build your monetization. You really have to know how to build your marketing, these two things, in order to be really successful and reach top grossing.
And a bit of luck.
Yeah, that is true. That's true.
A little bit of luck sprayed on top. So Falko, when you're looking at studios to acquire, do you also consider studios that are focusing solely on the gameplay and then you add all the monetization expertise on top, or do they have to also have that in-house?
No, they have to have that to a certain extent in-house. We try to, of course, offer best learnings, and we do develop technology, like what I mentioned earlier, like figuring out what a player is into, so we can just not offer them a random loot box, but an item that actually fits their play style and stuff like that. Something that a small team maybe cannot handle by themselves, or at least where it would make sense to do it once for multiple ones. But we are looking at the business first, right? Actually, for me, it's interesting being on the M&A side versus the publisher side. I don't even care how you design your game, because if there's a working business there, if you have a completely different idea that all the publishers told you is bullshit, I'm happy for you. That's the way it should go, right? You should be able to make a business out of a game that you think is the right way to approach it. Of course, there's huge survivorship bias, right? I only meet the people that made it to that point. So the people that didn't have a good plan for their monetization early on, unfortunately, I probably never get to meet them, right? Or they launch the game, it never gets traction. Yeah, because we focus so much on established businesses. On the publishing side, I've seen a lot of developers that came with they didn't even have decided on a business model yet, where I felt like, if you're asking for other people's money, you really should expect them to also want to make that back at some point, right? So I adore people that go out there for the art and make a cool game, and I love that with the Apple Arcade, for example. We now do have other venues of designing games where you can focus on other things, maybe where you can still have success in the market with games like this. But for our model, which is a lot of mid-core, very traditional free-to-play model, where these things are so essentially important, we need to have at least a foundation there. And then, yeah, education is super important, right? We try to bring our teams together once a year so they can exchange ideas and best practices. We try to look at the data that we get from different genres, different subtypes of games, and share that throughout the team so everybody gets better at making games.
Yes. So for smaller studios, how's the future looking like for 2024 and beyond? And let's not make any jokes about the Unity, the price of Unity. So, but how's that looking? Can you still make it as a small indie studio, or do you need to team up with someone in order to have a fighting chance at earning money and handing out reasonable-sized paychecks to your staff?
I think it's a risk management thing, right? Yes, you will always see a studio that came out of nowhere, that got a few talented people together, have this breakout hit without ever working with a big investor or a big publisher that kind of build it from the ground up. But there's a lot of, again, survivorship bias there, where only the best of that make it. And then, do you want to give up some of your ownership of your project, and how early and how much money do you take from other people to share that success? I definitely think the chance of success goes up by partnering up with other smart people, but then the payoff in the end for you is also a little bit lower, right? So you have to make that decision for yourself and have a realistic look at your skills and the people you have and the project you have, and decide how much you want to partner up with somebody else. But yeah, working with other people that have the experience will always be helpful.
I'd say that that's the question of partnering, and you should totally do it as a small developer. It's the question of what you're willing to sacrifice at the end of the day. So you can go one way and work with a publisher, and that totally gives you an access to very experienced marketing teams, very experienced monetization teams. But in the majority of the situations, you will have to sacrifice part of your revenue, a big chunk. In other situations, you can go with Apple Arcade or Netflix, subscription services where you can be paid a predictable amount of money, and you can concentrate on just making the best game possible. But once again, you will not be able to break this glass ceiling. So you will not be able to earn more. But at the same time, we've seen examples, even recently, for example, Vampire Survivors, a big indie hit that came both on PC, consoles, and then on mobile. They've earned up money, and they were pretty happy about it. But the real money were earned by Happy, who just took the initial core, who took meta from other great performing games of theirs, and then combined it, and now they're earning, I think, more than $10 million a month, if I recall it correctly. So basically, it's the question of if you've got a really good idea, and if you go to the market, the moment you're big enough and you're visible enough to all the market, there will be a big player who will take your idea and using their experience and using their power, make it profitable for them. So it's just the question of, risk and success ratio, and it makes total sense to try and partnership with someone.
Because otherwise, someone may just copy your idea, and they will have
exactly.
more power behind it to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's very fair to build on the success of others, and there's so many decisions in establishing a studio. I'm thinking not just from the funding perspective, but also the tech perspective. Are you using managed services, or are you building your own engine? All of these decisions are really important and happen so early, and are some of the ethos of your company, essentially. So I personally would go about it from a partnership perspective. Other people are way smarter than me that have built great tech or who understand the UA space better. So, but that's a very personal decision to some extent.
We have a few minutes left now, so do we have any questions
I'm sure
from the audience?
I just want to chuck one at you. You mentioned Vampire Survivors. That was a deliberate decision that developer made. And they were talking to publishers about monetization, and they were really not good. Not as in the Vampire Survivors team's response to people. In fact, they actually lambasted other publishers, because of monetization strategies from I would say an ego point of view. But then I'm biased. I have various opinions. I mean, to be honest, they got what they should have been expected and were told would happen. So
they were warned, and there was their choice.
They had a particular model that they wanted to go for. It was explained to them the issues that would cause. There were ethical approaches that they were told that they could do. They didn't take up that conversation. They chose not to take up the conversation. I could be much more profound about the details of that. I'll do that offline, because I don't like to talk shop out of store, but I'm not a happy person with their article that they put out about publishers being evil because we want to monetize. So let's just put it that way. I won't say any more than that. Anyway, we had questions over here. Sorry, we had questions. Go for it.
Thank you for the great discussion and for sharing your insights, especially the points about the revenue split between ads and IAP. I thought were interesting. On your points about subscriptions being viable in the future, do you think, where do you think they fit into the monetization strategy, especially in casual and in hyper casual? Do you think they're just a nice bump, like a nice little addition, or do you assume that they can really take the core of the monetization strategy in that space?
Well, that's a good question. I'd say that for it to be the core of the monetization strategy, it should be really implemented and intertwined with the core gameplay. So then the monetization type really depends on the core and meta. And if you want your subscription to be really valuable to the player, you need to think about it from the terms of gameplay as well, right from the get-go. So if you already have a game, or it's a very predictable known genre, then I think it will be more as a good addition, but not the base for your monetization. And frankly speaking, I haven't seen a whole subscription-based game that were really good implemented in the core gameplay and in the meta yet. But if there are any examples you can share, I will be really happy to dig into it.
Yeah, I think there's so much left unexplored there, right? Like, if there would be a subscription that just gives me a bunch of hyper-casual games without any of the ads or something like that, I'm the kind of player that would be interested in it. I feel there's a lack of options in hyper-casual of like how to monetize those. So I would be totally interested to see kind of different approaches to subscriptions and how they could work with hyper-casual.
Where I've seen it work is actually in kids' games before, where it's your parents want to buy a subscription to something, it's an easier model than all the in-app purchases and whatnot. So it's also who is your audience that you're going for.
You know how much your kids will be spending then, and they don't
control.
Yeah, and they don't see a whole lot of ads in the
yeah, exactly.
Well. Yes, yeah.
I mean, there is a risk if you enter into the all-you-can-eat piece, because I think without upsell, subscription can actually damage your kind of longevity. But it's about understanding what you're selling and why, and what the value proposition is and why people care about it, and all the other stuff that we know we need to do. I'm a big believer that we can be ethical in the way that we do monetization. We don't just have to be grabbing cash, and actually if we do, we build long-term value, and it's that long-term value which actually provides better longer-term revenue, in my opinion. But then I've got lots of views. I think you had another question.
Thank you for the talk. About subscriptions, but the different ones. So what's your take on Apple Arcade, Netflix games, Game Pass, what were there also? Those type of services that you can actually buy a subscription for 6 euros, I think, the Apple Arcade, and you will get a bunch of games. But from a player, from a developer perspective, from a business perspective, basically the monetization not through the IAPs and ads, but stores, subscriptions.
That is a sweet, sweet deal if you can get in. It's my understanding that there's a very closed ecosystem of games, right? They are looking for the best quality content, and I think once you're in and can qualify for that with your game, it's also a good business that you can survive on as well. It might not have the complete upside of a hit mobile game, for example, but a good sustainable business for yourself. So I'm pro, but.
Yeah, they're all slightly different though, right? And Netflix is basically work for hire based on the IP that they have in a lot of cases. Apple Arcade is kind of like games that often wouldn't be traditional mobile games that you can then, through the business model, fit. I think for small developers or developers that want to go that way, it's a bit too black boxy to kind of make that decision. I don't like that, like, do most developers know how you get paid in Apple Arcade? How much? Like, does it depend on the active users? Is it an upfront? It's really hard to tell for a lot of people, and making this big business decision on maybe finding out what the business model is later is tricky, right? I, as a consumer, really like it. I'm a big fan of Apple Arcade. In some cases, I feel I would like to see more free-to-play genres that are made for mobile games come into Apple Arcade, because I'm a PC console gamer. I look for a different experience on mobile. It's cool that they have like big RPGs in there, but sometimes I want to play a merge game, but maybe not watch 15 ads to get my energy back up or something like that. Maybe there's a middle ground where you can provide that experience in one of those prepaid services, just as another option, just to enrich the whole ecosystem.
That's a really good thing you've mentioned merge, because just recently a merge game hit Apple Arcade. And it looks like it was originally designed as a classical free-to-play game, but maybe it didn't reach the benchmarks that were set by the developers. At the same time, they somehow got Apple Arcade interested, and the whole monetization system and the progression system was redesigned just for being played in Apple Arcade. So maybe it is a way as well. So if you develop a game and then it doesn't end up with reaching your expectations, but at the same time you believe in it, you like it, then maybe you can try it.
And I just want to add quickly to that. I think as a developer, it's a great principle. But the worry I have is that the way that most of those models work is they are all you can eat. Adding a game increases and saturates the market, reducing the share, reducing the value for the developer. I think it's a law of diminishing returns. So I have a fundamental issue with that model. Xbox Game Pass, however, where things are going out of the model and you can still do upsell in the model. That, to me, is a vastly better commercial proposition and a better consumer proposition to boot. I'm a massive fan of the way Xbox do that. I know there are issues, don't get me wrong, but personally, I think that's the much more interesting. And unfortunately, we have to wrap at this point, and I'll just chuck one more line at this, which is one of the things I think is most interesting that I've learned in the years about monetization is looking at these individual monetization levers as a chain, as a path, where we can take people using ads to teach them what the value of the game is, what's interesting in the game, what they're going to want to spend money on in the game, and then building them towards the subscription model, but still having the ability to upsell after that. And if you look at the value proposition, what players care about in the long term, and provide them with the frictionless model that they can work with, your game will have a better monetization overall, in my opinion. On that note, if anyone wants to disagree with me, please shout. I know I have a tendency to overtalk everybody. You know me well enough, I'm sure. But if anyone has any other thoughts, please shout. Otherwise, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.